Janna is going to present now, and hopefully she's with us. Yes, she is. Please share your screen and off you go.
Well, hello. Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure to see so many people interested in ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems. A bit of a presentation. So this is a paper that is a part of my thesis. I just defended my thesis this spring, and it's going to be published as a book chapter. And it's a comparative analysis of 5 entrepreneurial ecosystems in life sciences. I will be soon looking for new research opportunities because I finished my PhD. So anybody have ideas about open positions, throw it my way. But right now I'll tell you more about the paper. Let's see if I also can find a way of changing the slide. Here we go. Okay, so aim of the presentation is as follows. We talk about entrepreneurial ecosystems. It's a concept which is a framework aimed to increase entrepreneurial performance in a region. This presentation is a bit more of a traditional paper presentation. So the paper itself aims to explore and compare the nature of 5 different ecosystems in life sciences and in 2 countries. I will outline the commonalities and differences of these ecosystems. And at the end, there will be a bit of a developing future research agenda from there. Interestingly, so I will talk about multiscalarity, which Fumi and Matthias talked about, and Michaela's sectoral ecosystems is also in here. Okay. So the background, entrepreneurial ecosystem is, in my case, a set of interdependent actors and factors coordinated in such a way that they enable productive entrepreneurship within a particular territory, as you already read this before. Geography and institutions matter. Entrepreneurial ecosystems have unique configurations and interactions. And the crucial issue is the extent to which and how the elements interact, and also important how strong these relationships are in an ecosystem. We still have an empirical challenge to develop appropriate metrics and how we should compare different ecosystems. The research gap and research question, so why I did this study really was like this. Part of the literature still maintains that only qualitative research can understand the complexity of entrepreneurship. And we have a lot of count-based metrics, but they are said not to adequately capture the varying importance of actors and different processes in ecosystems. So a few studies combine comparative and qualitative approaches. So this paper is going beyond statistical descriptions, and few studies investigate the combination of both national and regional factors. So here I look at multiscalar approach. Research question is, what factors are at play in entrepreneurial ecosystems in different regions, and how do they impact the dynamics of innovative firms in the life science industry? Context is so I look at life sciences, so that's a specific industry. High risk activity, high dynamic industry require heavy financial resources and often very many actors involved over a very long time and different scales. Regional scales. I look at 5 entrepreneurial ecosystems. I have 4 in Sweden. That's Sweden, a small country, and we have cluster activity in Lund, Gothenburg, Stockholm, and Uppsala. And one region is in Northeast Ohio in US, which is a contrasting case. And these are, as I said, known to be centers of life sciences. I have an inductive explorative approach. I have compared, interesting in the studies that I compare extreme and similar cases. So to US, Sweden is pretty extreme, and it's also interesting to see the variations within the country. 40 interviews and analysis is abductive, where I go between theory and my findings. So findings are as follows. We have 9 key dimensions. So I compare the 5 ecosystems on these 9 dimensions. We have things that you've heard before, but these are specific for life sciences. So university-industry links are important, large firms, entrepreneurial support infrastructure, funding, global links, institutions and IP, local and national links. Entrepreneurial management is important, and also the role of hospitals here. So these features or factors are unique in nature and how they function to their specific ecosystems. Many are interdependent. They present both barriers and drivers. In each function at different geographical scales. And in my case, of course, the extreme differences, as I said, between how US factors play out and the Swedish ecosystems. But there are also differences in Sweden, as I said, in the same institutional context. So university industry links are, there's a really big difference. US, very strong, universities are private. They work together, aligning actors and take part in regional economic development. Sweden looks different. They're often strong research connections, but weak on commercialization connections. And Uppsala, it's a small place like Lund, where I'm from, centered around university, but it has very strong informal and highly trusted university industry links. Stockholm is large, it's a rich academic environment, so there's also good connections there. However, Lund and Gothenburg have historically weak connections due to large firms' impact. Which is very interesting, and that takes us to the next point, which is large firms. And in US, there are no large firms, but universities and hospitals take up large firms' functions and networks. And in Sweden, we have a strong impact of large firms' culture on nature and quality of the small firms. We had AstraZeneca, and it had historically closed culture and no spin-offs almost. That impacted how ecosystems develop. And Uppsala and Stockholm had Pharmacia, also AstraZeneca, Stockholm has AstraZeneca too, but Pharmacia had open innovation culture and many spin-offs, and that is still, that type of culture is still present in ecosystems today. Institutions and IP, of course, are important. This is in US, intellectual property rights are owned by university or hospitals, and they have much stronger focus on commercialization. You look at Sweden, IP is owned by inventor, completely different story. There we have weaker focus on commercializations and growth from the culture side. Of course, the different patterns that I mentioned that stem from how large firms have impacted the different ecosystems. Entrepreneurial support infrastructure, around which you can say you have ecosystem by itself. But US has strong entrepreneurial and knowledgeable entrepreneurial support infrastructure. Sweden, often not as networked, and national organizations are even criticized for shallow support and high burden of reporting. But there are, of course, differences between regions, and Uppsala is strongest of them in Sweden. Gothenburg even was called inward-looking at times, which can, I guess, become better. Funding, huge difference. There are differences in number and variety of sources of funding, how public and private combinations are in different regions, as well as amount of funding available. US funding is available through federal agencies and 10 times larger than Swedish. In Sweden, all regions in Sweden experienced deficiency and suffer of lack of international investment. This is all life sciences, right? National funding was mostly invested in research infrastructure, and not as many risky programs are in place. There are, of course, but not as many as in the US. Many firms use business angels or private way to fund their firms, compared to US, where you have larger national federal funding. And interestingly, Stockholm has, of course, lots of regional and international funders. And then you have business angels. Of course, rich people are in our big city, but Lund is farthest away from Stockholm, and you don't see as many investments from those private business angels to Lund, and that's like really 4 hours drive or 6 hours drive from Stockholm to Lund. Last two are global links and local links. Global links in US, of course, it's a large country, less important due to large national context. In Sweden, life science firms have to go very quickly abroad, and very important, of course, global connections for product firms rather than service firms. So there's also a difference between type of firms. Sweden is very good at global research links, but not as good to create market relationships. The issue seems to be lack of confidence, of knowledge about international markets and how to navigate them at the firm level. Interestingly, born globals seem to receive larger amount of national and international funding. They seem to develop unique capabilities to fit also an international market, and this could attract even more foreign investment. When we look at national links, when we look at national links, US has strong local and national links, and Sweden has strong local links specifically for service firms, because service firms really say that they work together with other firms in the region. Also Uppsala said similar things, and Stockholm had strong national links also because many other ecosystems want to collaborate with Stockholm. Findings as in about entrepreneurial management and the role of hospitals. These are the two last. Entrepreneurial management, again, US, seems like US is strong in everything, but they employ skilled managers very quickly. And division of labor between research and commercializations becomes very important and effective in US. In Sweden, we have weak in firms, entrepreneurial management is weak, and CEO is often the scientist for a while. And hospitals, again, US, very strong, many spin-offs, many collaborations. Swedish hospitals are not as good at collaborating with small firms at this point. Yes, so the future research agenda is as follows. I've been talking about differences between 5 different ecosystems on different factors, but we still need to look at how entrepreneurial ecosystem makes international connections. What does it mean to internationalize? And what is required to make that happen really in the ecosystem? This, of course, been already studied in international business literature, and we can bring that knowledge in. As a number 2 suggestion, we should do more, we give more attention to multi-scala approach. At what spatial scales the different dimensions, for example, like funding would operate. We should be more specific about differences between countries and how institutional and cultural dimensions impact firms. Number 3 would be the being specific to one sector. So I looked at life science sector here. So this means that my ecosystem is not only region specific, but also sector specific. But I also realized that while interviewing, subsectors do use factors in a different way. So going even deeper and creating more better understanding about ecosystem around medtech, pharmaceutical and biotech firms separately, and how those things, what factors they share in what way could be very insightful. And the last point would be to look at dynamics. We need more systematic understanding of what are the important factors as the entrepreneurial ecosystem evolve over time, and the way different dimensions act during the development. So this is just a summary with a picture. We looked at the structures, and there are striking differences among 5 ecosystems. The factors have relative importance, and we also looked at the way they're interlinked and act at different scales. The green square down here, you see more entrepreneurial ecosystem for life sciences, local level, and then we need to think about national and global levels and what they mean. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Anna. That's very great and very interesting as well. Do you have any questions for Anna? You've mentioned something that is coming across from the previous presentations, that we seem to be in need of distinguishing between these different subsystems of the ecosystems. And the question is, how should we look at the configurations of those sectoral ecosystems? Because from what you're presenting, it seems like when we focus on a particular sector, they have very different cultures and needs in terms of different actors required for development of these companies. Should we then, what would be your advice in terms of how we should be focusing on studying ecosystems that are a bit broader in scope? Should we be including some kind of separate variables to account for those different sectoral configurations as well?
Do you mean if we look at several, let's say, what I call different sectoral ecosystems?
Yes. So, for example, if we focus on a broader geographical space, for example, of whole Stockholm, that includes a couple of sectors, how could we, include that level of qualitative detail, that complexity of the sectorally specific ecosystem issues?
Right, so that's the thing. The qualitative research is complex and heavy, and to take in too much information at once can be hard to analyze. So that's why, from my point of view, I would like to know, if I understand life sciences, then I would like maybe next time to understand another industry like ICT industry, and then I would like to see where they overlap, and then I would add another industry that I understand, an ecosystem for that industry, and overlap that again to see how they differ and where they have common points. If I understand those overlaps, then I can have policies which perhaps can support both or 3 or 4 of those sectoral ecosystems. But I guess if I want to study the whole Stockholm, I would probably do it quantitatively. It's really hard to interview the whole Stockholm ecosystem to a deep level. But of course, everything can be done, but it will take time.
Thank you. We have a quick question from Maxim in the chat. He's asking whether you use the same questions for interviews across all 5 cities.
Yes, yes, I do. So we developed, it's an open, semi-structured interviews, and we had topics in our interview form, and we used the same in all 5.
Thank you, Jana. Kind of local question, actually, knowing Lund a little bit. I wonder, you mentioned there's not much sort of investment from Stockholm, but I wonder what's kind of going on with sort of Denmark, or this kind of Ulsan sort of bio cross-border region. Is there like a kind of ecosystem emerging, or was it not quite flying?
Oh, ecosystem in Lund is really, it's one of the best. It's really good, and because you say as yes, we have Copenhagen next door, and and it has been developed a lot since AstraZeneca closed down. So we had a positive turnaround after a large firm fired 1,000 people, and a new medical village science park was developed. So it has been really getting speed in different ways there. So for sure, there's it plays a role that we are closer to Europe and we are close to Copenhagen area. So now there are more and more collaborations starting to develop, and we call it Medican Valley, as you probably have heard. So yeah, that's definitely happening.
Thank you. Any questions from the floor? Okay. Oh, we've got Andreas.
Hi, thanks for an interesting presentation. Super. One point I found especially interesting, because I don't hear it a lot, is about global links. And for me personally, that's a very important factor of ecosystems. And here in Berlin, I find it all the time that startups from a very young age are actually very connected globally. Could you maybe elaborate a bit more? Because I find it interesting that you compare different regions, and maybe you found something like a pattern of global linkage in that area. So I mean, differences or structural differences even.
You mean the differences between regions when it comes to global links?
Exactly.
So that, first of all, it depends on what type of firms you have. If it's a service firm or if it's a product firms. Product firms have naturally more links globally. In Sweden, they connect very quickly to the best researchers in the world, and they're very proud of it, and that's very obvious. Then they also, well, first they try to sell locally, but then they realize they have to go globally because Sweden is too small. And then they say, we have our customers globally. We are trying to adjust our product to global scale. That's I'm just thinking the differences between the regions. Okay, between US and Sweden, it's more obvious because US have global thinking a bit later because they have such a big market themselves. But in Sweden, if you have a lot of product firms in one region, they have more global thinking. In Lund, for example, it's the development there of ecosystem is relatively new, even if it's very positive. And there are many service firms started. And those service firms are not interested in global links at the start. That will come later. So service firms were using local links first because they say our business come through networks, local networks, through trust networks that we have created during our work somewhere else. And yeah, so that is the type of firms that drives the need. Yeah, so again, so I would say you would have research networks globally, and then you would think about commercial links globally. And commercial links are not as developed in Sweden, for example, as they should be.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just regarding these global links, a very interesting concept. And I was wondering to what extent these global links differ from a specific territory to another. I mean, do there are major differences between the American model and the European one?
Sorry, say again, the last sentence?
Do there are, I mean, for instance, major differences between the US and Sweden regarding these global links? I mean, what are the similarities and differences, the main one?
I mean, global links meaning that you source certain information or resources globally outside of your region, right? So if you are in Lund and you need to connect to a certain top researcher, you would probably go first maybe to Stockholm, and then maybe you go outside. But that is because Sweden is small, and you would quickly leave Sweden. If you are in US, that's a different story. Like in Sweden, you have to do it quickly for life science firms because resources are outside of Sweden. In US, big difference because region itself is pretty rich. There are more people living there. The country is bigger, so you use national links first before you go abroad from US. So US would go abroad after they have created the product and tried it on the market. And in Sweden, you have to try your product on market which is outside of Sweden, which makes these born global firms learn very fast, Swedish ones that go outside. So yes, they are different in how small firms act when they think about creating global links. And also where these links can come from. In US, you can have university hospitals and other organizations that provide this international links when it's needed later. And in Sweden, the system is not as network on commercial links. So I think there should be more, the small firms should be able to source this global links through through support system in a better way. So it's what you need and how to get it in terms of global links.
Thank you.